Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from London. I'm Ollie Barrett and these are the headlines. And some significant breaking news out of Germany in the last few moments. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz announces a halt in the certification of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline due to connect Russia to Germany. And he warns that Moscow could see further sanctions following. Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia's recognition of his country's two breakaway regions is a precursor for a further military assault.
Plainly, President Putin has now violated Ukrainian sovereignty. He's sent troops in. He's broken international law.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the UK will introduce immediate sanctions against Russia and warns President Vladimir Putin is bent on a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar says the situation in Ukraine is the result of a complex chain of events over the past 30 years and hopes for a diplomatic solution. And in New Zealand, riot police clash with anti-vax protesters outside the country's parliament. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern expresses concern over the violent clashes. Russia is bracing for coordinated sanctions from Western capitals after President Vladimir Putin significantly escalated the Ukraine crisis. And as we've been hearing in the last few moments, Germany has announced it will halt the certification of the crucial Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Russia and Europe. Vladimir Putin officially recognized Donetsk and Lugansk in eastern Ukraine as independent states. Pro-Russian separatists there had declared independence from Ukraine in 2014. There's been fighting since between Russian-backed rebels and the Ukrainian military. And now, after 8 years of referring to the conflict as intra-Ukrainian, the Russian president has declared the independence of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic. Vladimir Putin also ordered a troop deployment in the area for what Moscow calls peacekeeping duty.
Цель нашего сегодняшнего совещания заключается в том, чтобы послушать коллег и определить наши дальнейшие шаги на этом направлении, имея в виду и обращение руководителей Донецкой Народной Республики и Луганской Народной Республики к России с просьбой признания их суверенитета и постановления Государственной Думы Российской Федерации на эту же.
The US president immediately consulted with the leaders of France and Germany and quickly announced a package of trade and finance sanctions against the two pro-Moscow regions in Ukraine. Then followed an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council, where both Russian and Ukrainian representatives addressed the panel.
It depends on what it does.
There has also been shelling of some towns and villages on Russian territory near the border zone. And so it has become clear that Donbass is on the brink of a new Ukrainian military adventure. I would like to call upon our Western colleagues to think twice, to set emotions to one side, and not to make the situation worse. No one other than you can hold back the militaristic plans of Kiev and force it to stop the shelling and provocations against the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics which in these new conditions could have extremely dangerous consequences. In accordance with the agreements that were signed today and on the basis of their requests from the Republic, peacekeeping functions on their territories will be carried out by the armed forces of the Russian Federation.
In accordance with Article 51 of the Charter, Ukraine has the inherent right to individual and collective self-defense. We are committed to a peaceful and diplomatic path, and we will stay firmly on it. We are on our land. We are not afraid of anything or anyone. We owe nothing to anyone, and we will not give away anything to anyone. There should be no doubts whatsoever, because it is not February 2014. It is February 2022.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is demanding clear support from the West. After meeting his National Security Council and holding telephone conversations with several world leaders, Zelensky called Moscow's decisions a violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine.
Україна однозначно кваліфікує останні дії Російської Федерації як порушення суверенітету та територіальної цілісності нашої держави. Вся відповідальність за наслідки в зв'язку зі згаданими рішеннями покладається на політичне керівництво Росії. Визнання незалежності окупованих районів Донецької та Луганської областей може означати односторонній вихід Росії з Мінських домовленостей.
Our correspondent Giles Gibson filed this report from Moscow.
The last few hours, what's been happening here in Moscow is that the Russian Duma, the Russian parliament, has been working through some legislative processes in certain councils within the Duma to try to ratify some of the documents that were signed by Vladimir Putin on Monday evening local time here in Moscow. We're also, of course, hearing reports about action along the front line between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists. The Ukrainian government saying that 2 soldiers have been killed, 12 soldiers wounded in the last 24 hours. And we've also had a report from the Reuters news agency talking about that there were tanks spotted moving into the city of Donetsk in the last 12 hours or so, although they said that these armoured vehicles, these tanks, didn't actually have any markings, so it's not entirely clear whether those are Russian forces or you know exactly what they are. But it looks like after Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, gave that order to move what he called peacekeeping troops into these self-proclaimed republics, into these breakaway regions, that Russian forces are now moving forward with putting boots on the ground there.
Well, the United Kingdom will announce economic sanctions against Russia shortly. Prime Minister Boris Johnson and government officials held early morning crisis response committee meetings here in London to discuss the sanctions. But unlike the United States, Britain's first sanctions will not be targeting the regions of eastern Ukraine.
We will immediately institute a package of economic sanctions, which I think, as people would expect, targeted not just at entities in Donbass, in Lugansk and Donetsk, but in Russia itself, targeting Russian economic interests as hard as we can, and we will be. But the intention is not just to hit the entities within Lugansk and Donetsk, but those Russian economic interests that have been supporting Russia's war machine.
Well, the Prime Minister will set out those sanctions in the House of Commons in less than an hour from now. Our correspondent Laura Makin-Isherwood is joining us live from London in the meantime. Laura, do we have any sense of what the UK sanctions will actually target?
Well, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has made it very clear that this is going to be a barrage of sanctions coming down on Russia, and it's going to be targeting Russia itself. People and companies that are linked to the Russian government and the wider Russian economy, because the Prime Minister says, be in no doubt that if Russian companies are prevented from raising capital on the UK financial markets, if we unpeel the facade of Russian ownership of companies, he said, of property too, then it will start to hurt the Russian government and, as he says, the Russian war machine. Now, of course, the Prime Minister met with his ministers this morning at a Cobra meeting that was called as an emergency earlier this morning, where he was asking ministers to basically rubber stamp his plans. They will then be set out to Parliament in just under an hour's time, as you said, so we'll get more details on exactly what they will be shortly. But we do understand that this will be the first of many if Russia does continue to move into Ukraine and continue forward pressing on the capital.
And Laura, does Britain rate the chances of diplomacy high, riding to the rescue here to head off an all-out war that Boris Johnson's been warning about?
Well, we know that the Prime Minister is saying that intelligence does point to the fact that President Vladimir Putin may be looking to invade. But that hasn't stopped the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, putting out this message essentially that diplomacy is still an option. He's asking Vladimir Putin to take a step back, saying that there is still the option for his troops to be pulled back out away from those Ukrainian borders with that option for dialogue. But we do know, given that these sanctions are going to be imposed, the West and the UK think this is pretty serious. And the message from Boris Johnson is that he believes that Vladimir Putin is bent on an all-out invasion.
Laura, thank you. Almost all COVID measures in England are being brought to an end. Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced details of his plans to live with COVID. The British government wants citizens to start treating COVID-19 like other transmissible illnesses such as flu.
First, we will remove all remaining domestic restrictions in law.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Monday said he would lift all coronavirus restrictions in England.
We will end routine contact tracing and no longer ask fully vaccinated close contacts and those under 18 to test daily for 7 days.
Johnson's move to end health restrictions has drawn skepticism from some scientists and political opponents who warn the move is premature and will leave the country vulnerable to new viral variants.
Mr. Speaker, COVID will not suddenly disappear. So those who would wait for a total end to this war before lifting the remaining regulations would be restricting the liberties of the British people for a long time to come.
The Prime Minister said the economic costs and the toll on personal liberty were too high to pay any longer. The plan to ditch remaining legal restrictions is a priority for many of Johnson's Conservative Party lawmakers, whose discontent over his scandal-ridden leadership has threatened his grip on power.
Canada's Parliament has approved the government's decision to bring in emergency powers to deal with the trucker protest in Ottawa. This a day after Canadian police announced they had reclaimed the city. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the country's state of emergency is not over and said that concerns remain for the days ahead.
But even though the blockades are lifted across border openings right now, even though things seem to be resolving very well in Ottawa, this state of emergency is not over. There continues to be real concerns about the coming days, but we will continue to evaluate every single day whether or not it is time and we are able to lift this state of emergency.
The last set of protesters was pushed out of Canada's capital on Sunday after a massive police operation. The truckers' protest gained momentum, attacking Canada's cross-border vaccine requirement and turned into a broader movement against the Trudeau government's vaccine rules in general. Meanwhile, in New Zealand, protests against vaccine mandates have turned more violent. One protester seen speeding towards a group of police officials outside Parliament was arrested. This as officials were trying to contain a camp that has jammed downtown Wellington for 2 weeks now. In another incident, protesters hurled stinging substances officials. 3 injuries and were hospitalised. The protesters' Freedom Convoy have grown to over 1,500 people and now cover a range of issues. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern condemned the attacks, calling them absolutely disgraceful. Police have faced some criticism for not doing enough to quell the protests. Israel has successfully tested the Sea Dome, a new naval air defence system. It can intercept a series of threats and is a key protection against Iran and its proxies in the region. Israel's defence forces confirmed the news, saying it was an advanced naval configuration of the Iron Dome aerial defence system. The Sea Dome is being installed on Israel's latest generation corvette warships. These warships protect Israel's coastline and natural gas assets in the Mediterranean. According to the IDF, this live fire test is an important milestone and demonstrates the operational capability of the Israeli Navy to defend the strategic assets and vital interests of the State of Israel against current and evolving threats. And that is why Monday's test simulated a number of incoming threats, such as rockets, cruise missiles and drones. Last week, a pair of drones were launched into Israeli airspace by the Iranian-backed Hezbollah militant group. It also comes as Iran is reportedly close to signing a new international nuclear deal with global powers. The new deal should free Iran from crippling sanctions. Israel opposes it. It fears that Iran will divert newly released funds to proxies like Hezbollah. Hezbollah has made no secret of the fact that it would target Israel's gas platforms if fighting breaks out. In 2006, Israel and Hezbollah fought a month-long war. During the fighting, Hezbollah fired a missile that struck an Israeli warship that killed 4 soldiers. South Korea is the only developed country where tattooing is actually outlawed. An estimated 3 million people, though, in South Korea have at least one tattoo. But with the presidential elections just around the corner, the polls could mark an end to South Korea's tattoo taboo.
In South Korea, tattoos are taboo.
The judiciary calls us the lawbreakers, fines us and sends us to jail.
Hi, I'm Seung-Kwan.
While tattoos have become increasingly in vogue among young people and K-pop stars, South Korea's older generation associate them with gangs and the belief that altering the human body means disrespect to one's parents. It is in fact illegal to perform tattoos here unless you're a medical professional. Tattoo artists can face police raids, prosecution, fines of up to the equivalent of $42,000 and even prison terms, in theory as much as life. All in all, it's a risky profession for guys like this.
Hello, I'm tattooist Doi Kim Do-yoon, who draws on human skin. South Korea is the only country that considers tattooing by non-doctors as illegal.
Doi is one of South Korea's most famous tattoo artists, having inked the likes of Brad Pitt. He practices from a modest building with no signage and says he just wants to practice his craft without fear. Last year, he was fined over $4,000 after a video of him inking a popular Korean actress went viral, a ruling that he's appealed. Doi leads a union of 650 tattoo artists. In a survey, the union found 6 cases of artists being sentenced to jail since last April, usually with prison sentences of 2 years. However, change could be on its way. Over the last 10 years, tattoos have become increasingly popular among young South Koreans. BTS band member Jungkook famously has several. And while tattoos are usually covered up on TV, celebrities have not been shy to show them off on social media. An appreciation for so-called K-tattoos has grown at home and abroad, often distinguished by fine line drawing, intricate detail and bold use of colour. The tattoo taboo is now even playing out in South Korean politics in the run-up to March's presidential election. Lee Jae-myung is the ruling party's candidate. In a move seen as courting young voters, he said it made no sense for the industry to be illegal, noting it was worth an estimated $1 billion, and promised to back bills now pending in Parliament to legalise tattooing.
I really hope the candidates will keep this pledge and that tattooing by non-doctors will become legal. As a person getting the tattoo, we don't get punished, but the people who do those tattoos for us get punished. That's quite uncomfortable, so I support that pledge.
It's estimated about 3 million people in South Korea have at least one tattoo. And if you count semi-permanent cosmetic tattoos, popular here for enhancing eyebrows, eyelines and hairlines, that rises to 13 million. Back on the campaign trail, Yoon Suk-yeol from the Conservative main opposition People Power Party has not yet decided his position on traditional tattoos, but supports legalising cosmetic ones. Ahn Cheol-soo, a third candidate who's had his eyebrows tattooed to look bushier, has not yet announced his position on the matter.
After COVID-induced delays and disruptions, one of Italy's most popular carnivals, Viareggio Carnival, has made its return. There's still limited capacity, but the seaside Tuscan city has welcomed extravagant, towering floats. Themes of human rights, homogeneity and environment are key this year. We'll leave you with those pictures. Thanks very much for watching. Do stay tuned to WION World is One. I'm Ollie Barrett.
The Viareggio Carnival is back to regular programming. After a pandemic-induced delay last year, the carnival was moved from its original slot in February to September, with only 5,000 spectators allowed. However, vaccine rollouts and the receding threat of the virus has enabled its return to its original slot this year. This is a huge respite for artists, organisers and carnival lovers. The organisers are still exercising caution. The carnival this year will operate at 50% capacity.
Very different editions in 2020 at full capacity. In 2021, 5,000 seated people, and today we are slowly getting back to normal. We have an available capacity of 80,000 people, but we limited the capacity to 40,000 because we know that this edition must have a slow start, since we must be sure to have found again the cheerfulness and the knowledge to be out of the pandemic and in full cheerfulness.
The main attractions of the carnival are the elaborate towering floats, used as pictorial tropes by the artists to send a message to the audience. The first Viareggio Carnival was held back in 1873, with the early editions based on themes of domestic politics. Over the years, the carnival has evolved and encompasses a wider range of themes catering to an international audience. These floats are designed to tell a story.
I think that this carnival can provide a wake-up call to the city. The fact that everything is so fast and so close can make you enter in a better way to the world of the carnival that we have dropped 2 years ago. We have tried to maintain it, and this edition seems to be a good perspective of normality.
These floats take an entire year to design and make, and each year the artists compete to win the prize for the best float. After a prolonged period of doom and gloom, the carnival and the experience and art it has to offer are bringing back colour and joy to the lives of the people of this Tuscan city. Bureau Report WION, World is One.
This is right, Arab.